Masechet Baba Kama Daf Kof. We mentioned in the Mishnah yesterday that if someone has a pathway of the public passing through his field, right in the middle of the field, there's an established pathway that the public uses to get from one side to the other. So he has to leave it for them. He cannot take it back. And even if he gives them a different path on the side so that his field won't be interrupted. You know what happens then? Not only does the new path that he gave them belong to them, but also the old path also belongs to them. And now the public will have two paths. Question is why? Why can't he give them a new one and take back the old one? And the answer we saw yesterday is because the new one is going to be roundabout. It might be roundabout for everyone, but even if it's straight through and is the same length as the old path, nevertheless, it will be farther away for some people who are coming from the other direction. And once a public has a path, they have a right to that path. And yeah, maybe if it's better for everyone, he can change it. But by default, it's not going to be better for everyone. For some people, it's going to be farther away. And therefore, the old path that they had, they keep. And the new path, they also have, and they can use that going forward. Now we ask about that. Why can't the owner of the field say, you take your original path and keep that, and the new one that I gave you, give it back to me? Because he thought, wrongly, but he thought that he can switch one path for the other and take back the old one and give them a new one so that he can have more continuity on his field. He thought he could do that. Now it turns out the court tells him, no, sorry, you can't do that. Okay, now that he learned that he can't do that, why can't he just do Control-Z, undo, and keep the old path as it was, and the new path, I thought the new path, I was giving it as a replacement of the old one. But now that you tell me I can't replace the old one, so let the field owner take back the new one that he just gave them. So the answer is Hamaneh Rabbi Eliezer hi detanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Rabim Shebararu Derech Le'asmam Ma Shebararu Bararu. The answer is that this Mishnah is following the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. And in a Baraita, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer that if the public has chosen for themselves a pathway, whatever they choose is chosen. In other words, they come and they started going down a certain path, that's it, it belongs to them. And even though they have an old path already, but now there's a new path and they chose that path and they started going down it, then that's it, it's theirs and you can't take it back. So that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and that's why the owner of the field, once he allowed the possibility for them taking a new one, he can't take it back. Even though, technically you could say it's mekach ta'ut, he only gave it to them on condition that, thinking that he can get the old path back for himself and give them a new path. But even so, Rabbi Eliezer says that once a public uses a path, that's it, it's theirs. Now we ask, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabim Gazlanim Ninhu, Rabbi Eliezer, how does this work? The public are entitled to be robbers? So you're telling me, if all of a sudden a big group of people decides, you know what, we want to make a new shortcut through some guy's field, and they just barge in and they start going back and forth. What, they're allowed to just steal anyone's land and just make paths wherever they want? This doesn't make sense. Amar Rav Gidel, Amar Rav, Kegon she'abda lahen derech be'ota sadeh. So Rav Gidel, in the name of Rav, says no. Rabbi Eliezer wasn't saying in any case the public can just go and chart a new path for them whenever and wherever they want. Rather, Rabbi Eliezer was talking about a case where the public had a path through a certain person's field, and now they lost exactly where the path is. Maybe the field owner plowed it over, and the markers that were there before are not there anymore. So the public then has a right to choose a new path. And so it might not be in the exact same spot as the old path was, but whatever they choose, that is theirs, and it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly in the same spot as the old one. Now, that's not exactly the same as our case, but we can learn from it. If in a case where they had a path, and now they don't know where it is, they can just choose any path they want, and it's theirs. So all the more so when the owner actually gave them permission for this new path, that they can, once they start going down it, then they can. The owner himself said, hey guys, I want everybody to use this path over here on the side. They started using it, so that's it. That becomes theirs. And so this Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer, and even though the owner meant that he was going to take the old path back for his own field, and that didn't work because the rabbi said that you can't do that. Nevertheless, once the public takes the new path, that's it. They get that one as well as the old one. We ask, Ihachi, Amai Amar Rabba, Bar Rav Huna Amar Rav, and Halacha Kerebi Eliezer. We have a question. This statement that we just said was in the name of Rav, that Rav is explaining Rabbi Eliezer. If he's explaining Rabbi Eliezer, it sounds like he agrees with him, and he actually gives a good explanation for Rabbi Eliezer. It makes sense that if they lost a path, so then they don't get no path at all, they can pick a new one. So Rav, on the one hand, above said that Rabbi Eliezer makes sense and is supporting Rabbi Eliezer with a good reason. That was what Rav Gidel said in the name of Rav. But then we have another statement by Rabbah, by Rav Huna, also in the name of Rav, that says Halacha does not follow Rabbi Eliezer. So why not? Why doesn't Halacha follow Rabbi Eliezer if he just gave a reason for it? And furthermore, if the Halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer, then our Mishnah does not make sense that our Mishnah would be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So we answer, Man de matneha la matneha. Whoever said this in the name of Rav did not say the other thing in the name of Rav. In other words, there's a machloket about what Rav said. And so according to Rav Gidel, Rav supported Rabbi Eliezer, gave a good reason for it, talked about here it works in this case. And according to that, that would be a good explanation of our Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer is the author of our Mishnah. Whereas there's another tradition about what Rav said in the name of Rabbah Bar Rav Huna, and he said, no, halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer. He did not explain Rabbi Eliezer that way, and according to him, our Mishnah would not be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So v'ta'amamai, so now we want to know, if so, then what's the explanation for our Mishnah? We need, according to Rabbah Bar Rav Huna, we need to answer our opening question. Since the owner gave a new path, but he was thinking he could get his old path back, and now that he says he can't get his old path back, so why can't he say, hey, you guys, public, take back your old path and give me the new one that I gave you wrongly? Why can't he take it back? Oh, Mishum de Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda, Mesar shecheziko borabim asur lekalkelo. It's because of what Rav Yehuda said. He taught that if there's a pathway that the public took possession of, then that's it. You're not allowed to destroy it. You can't prevent people from using it. And here, in this case, or similarly, the field, again, here, it doesn't mean that the public can just go steal whatever they want, but here, with permission of the owner said, go, everybody, go on this side path. And they did. And so they did a chazakah. They took possession of it by using it. That's it. The owner cannot destroy it, even though he had intention to give it only so they can get back his old one, but he was wrong about that. And nevertheless, once he gives a new one, he gives it. So this Mishnah follows this statement of Rav Yehuda, even though not Rabbi Eliezer. Now we ask, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabim b'mai chanu le. According to Rabbi Eliezer, who we said before, in the name of Rav Gidel, he said that if there was a path and now it's lost, we can't find it, they can go and just chart a new path and start walking there. What's the mechanism of their acquiring that path? See, there's a follow-up to this statement here, according to Rav Yehuda, hecheziku. They have to do some kind of chazakah, so I guess they would have to do some kind of action to take that. But Rabbi Eliezer just says that people started walking down a path, right? His exact words were, Rabim shebaradu. They chose a path, so they started walking there. He doesn't use the word chazakah. So what mechanism? I understand the right, it's the public, and that's it. They just, they can use it because they had an old path, so they deserve to get a new path. But so that's the right. But what's the mechanism by which they can acquire it? Don't they have to do something, some kind of action? And the answer is behilucha. Yes, just by walking, according to the Rabbi Eliezer, you can acquire a property, as we see in the following baraita. If someone walks the field's length and its breadth, and assuming with intention to acquire it, then he acquires any area that he walks, the entire breadth and length, that entire area, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Hachamim disagree and say that walking on it does not help anything. He has to actually make a chazakah. So Chachamim are giving the standard halacha that we usually assume. In order to acquire a field, you have to do something like pay money or lock the gate or do some work on the ground, improve it in some way. Okay, that's the majority opinion. But Rabbi Eliezer disagrees, and he says, walking on the land, wherever you walk, you acquire that much. And so that's the mechanism by which the public acquires this new ground. There was a path here, we don't know where it is, so they start walking through a new path, and that's how they choose the new path. That's it. Amar Rabbi Elazar, my Tama de Rabbi Eliezer. Now Rabbi Elazar, the Amorah, asks, what's the source for Rabbi Eliezer? How does he know that you can just walk around the land and then you acquire it? The source is what Hashem told Abraham. He said, go, arise and walk through the land, its length and its breadth, and I will give it to you. Whatever your feet step on, that is yours. So you see that this is a way of acquiring land. That's how Abraham Avinu acquired the land of Israel. That seems like a very good source. V'Rabbanan, hatam mishum habibu tad Abrahamu dekamar lehachi kedesh yenoach lichbosh lifnei banav. Says no, that was not an act of acquisition, but rather it was a sign of God's love to Abraham, that he wanted to show him, hey Abraham, I love you so much, I'm going to bless you and your descendants, and I want to show you what your descendants eventually will get. Abraham didn't actually acquire it yet just by doing that. He's just showing him in the future, listen, you're going to be father of many nations, and look at this land. I want you to survey the land that eventually your descendants will acquire. And this way, it'll make it easier for the descendants to conquer the land, because they'll know, oh, look, Avraham Avinu, he passed through this land. He walked around here. Hashem promised it to him. And therefore, they will be more energized and have more faith, be more inspired to be able to conquer that land. Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, חכמים לרבי אליעזר בשביל של כרמים הואיל ונעשה להילוך נקנה בהילוך. Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Chanina, says that even Chachamim, although they say usually you have to do an act of acquisition like working the land, improving the land, but they would agree with Rabbi Eliezer that walking on the land is sufficient if you're talking about a path that goes through a vineyard. In a vineyard, you have certain places where you plant the vines and other places that are paths for people to walk. Now, those paths, how do you use them? You use them by walking. That's what they're made for. Since they're made for walking, therefore, by walking it, you're using it in the usual way. So walking can be a form of acquisition if it's through a walking path. כי עתו לקמא דרב יצחק בר עמה, אמר להו, הבו לה כי הכי דדרה תונה דשבישתה והדר. One time there was a case that came before Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ameh about someone who had acquired a path to go through some other vineyard. And the question was, how big should that path be? And he answered them, you, the owner of the vineyard, have to give this buyer a path that's wide enough that he can carry a load of vine branches and be able to turn around within that path. So vine branches are, however long they are, they're usually 4 feet long. So then you'd have to be able to carry it, turn around. So that means it would have to be 4 feet long, or however long typical vine branches are. ולמדן אלא דמסיימין מחיצתה, אבל לא מסיימין מחיצתה, כי הכי דשקל קרעה ומנח קרעה. However, this ruling is only true if there are fences on both sides, such that in order to turn around, you'd have to clear both fences. So then there would have to be that width, but the width of the path would have to be the length of typical vine branches. However, if there are no fences on the sides, then it can be much thinner. And you know how thin? The size of the width of 1 foot, because not even 2 feet, because when you're walking, you can put 1 foot directly in front of the other, and therefore a path just to get through can be the size just the width of 1 foot. And if you need to turn around, you can turn around because no fence blocking your way. So that's just the airspace. You'll be able to turn around the vines within that airspace and just swivel on 1 foot, and so the pathway can be much smaller. All right, next part of the Mishnah says Derech hayachid arba amot, the standard width for a private path. If an individual has the rights to a path through someone else's field, like let's say they have an inner field, then the owner of the outer field gives them a path. They negotiate that, whatever is part of the sale, and it should be 4 amot. Now we have a different opinion, not 4 amot, which would be about 6 feet, but even less. Tana acherim omrim, kedesh yavor hamor b'masao, amar Ravuna halacha ke'acherim. So even though the author of the Mishnah says 4 amot, but others say that the path has to be sufficiently wide so that a donkey can pass pass while it's carrying its load. And Rav Huna says halacha is like that opinion of Acherim. V'tanya idach dayane gola omrim shene gemadim umechesa. V'amar Rav Huna halacha kedayane gola. However, we have a contradictory statement also by Rav Huna, because here we have a different braita that says that the judges of exile said that a pathway has to be 2.5 cubits. And Rav Huna said the halacha follows those judges of exile. So we ask, V'hamar Rav Huna halacha k'acherim, but Rav Huna just said the halacha is like others who say that the pathway has to be as wide as a donkey with its load. So isn't this a contradictory statement between this Rav Huna that says halacha is like the first baraita and the second Rav Huna that says it's like the second baraita? And the answer is idi v'idi had shiurahu. In fact, they're the same measurement. They're just expressed in different ways, whether you say it's a donkey and its load, or you say it's 2.5 cubits, that's actually the same thing. So Rav is consistent. Derech harabim shesh esrei amma. A public thoroughfare, as opposed to a private one, has to be 16 amot wide. Tenor Rabbanan. That, by the way, is the definition that's very relevant for making an eruv. If you follow this opinion, that a reshut harabim is 16 amot wide, then it could be very problematic to make an eruv in any city that has a road that's 16 amot, about 24 feet wide, would be a problem, because you can't really make an eruv around a reshut harabim. Luckily, there's another opinion that says 600,000 people travel through there every day. Anyway, so this is relevant for modern halacha. Tenor Rabbanan, derech hayachid arba amot, derech me'ir le'ir shemone amot. Braita says that a private path is 4 amot, as the Mishnah said above, and a path going from one city to another has to be 8 amot wide. This is not a public thoroughfare. This would still be a private one, just used by, let's say, residents of this city and that city, not a big thoroughfare that lots of people use. And it has to be 8 by 8 because it would be two-way traffic. So 4 amot is good for one person who's going one way at a time, but this has to accommodate two-way traffic, so 4 amot in each direction. Derech harabim shesh esrei amot, and the public thoroughfare is going to be 16. You can think of it as a 4-lane highway, 2 lanes in each direction. Derech are miklat sheloshim ushetayim amot, and a pathway to a city of refuge, because people will have to get there very quickly if they killed someone by mistake and they have to run there, so they can't deal with traffic, and therefore this will require an 8-lane highway, 4 lanes, I suppose, in each direction. Amar Rav Huna, Maikera dichtiv tachin lecha haderech derech haderech. What's the source in the pasuk? The answer is the pasuk says you should prepare a pathway, but the pathway says haderech, not just make a pathway, but make the pathway. And so the he comes to be an inclusive term, and that includes that it shouldn't just be a regular public thoroughfare, but twice as big as a standard public thoroughfare. Derech hamelech and la shiur shamelech pores gader lasot lo derech ve'en memachin biyado. The Mishnah taught that a king he can make a pathway as wide as he wants. He has a big entourage and his army, and so he is allowed, the Gemara explains, to breach fences of individuals along the way. He can claim an eminent domain, and nobody is allowed to stop him. That's his right. Derech hakeber and la shiur, and the Mishnah taught that a funeral procession can use a space as wide as they want, as all the people are coming and accompanying the coffin to the cemetery. And the Gemara explains, Mishum yekara deshachba, it's because of the honor of the deceased. If this is a very honorable person, very well-known person, or someone with a big family, and they have a lot of people that want to accompany the coffin to the cemetery. So if they're not allowed to use other people's property, it's going to be a problem. All these thousands of people have to squeeze onto just 4 amot. They won't be able to, and it won't be honorable for the person that they are burying. And therefore, this is a temporary pathway that they can use just while they are accompanying the coffin, and they're allowed to go on other people's property as wide as they need to, and that's important for the honor of the dead. Hama'amad dayanesi puri ameru bat arba kabin. Hama'amad, the ma'amad is referring to the ritual that after they buried the dead, dead, then on the way back to the town, they wouldn't just walk straight back, because that would show, okay, we're done with that, and we're moving on with our lives. But rather, the comforters want to show empathy with the mourners. And so they would stop 7 times, and the comforters would say, sit down, take a rest, think about our loss. They would offer words of comfort, and then they would say, okay, get up, and they would walk a little more. But then, this is very traumatic. That transition from right after the burial to go back to the town can be very traumatic. And so this was a way of comforting them to stop and think about it and meditate on their loss and offer various words. So this also needs space in order to do this ritual. So the Ma'amad, the Mishnah teaches that the judges in Siporis, they said that requires an area in which you would sow 4 kav of seed. So that's how much area is allowed to be used by the mourners and the comforters for the Ma'amad ceremony. Now we're going to learn more about it. Tenor Banan. Hamocher kibro, derech kibro, mekom ma'amado, ubet mespedo, bain bene mishpacha vekobrin oto al korcho, mishum pegam mishpacha. If a family owns a certain burial plot, which in those days was often a cave with many different sections in which whenever someone died in the family, they would bury them in that area within the cave. Now, if they owned this plot, but then one of the family members sold to someone else the rights to that plot, or they sold the rights to get to the pathway to get to that cemetery, or they sold the rights to the place where they usually do the ma'amad ceremony, the standing and sitting, or they sold the place where they usually give the eulogy whenever someone in that family dies, and then they're giving the eulogy. They sold any of these places. And so then one of the family members dies. The law is that the family members are allowed to come and bury their dead in that same family cave, even against the wishes of the new owner. Why? Because of a family flaw. When you have a whole family that's buried in a certain cave, and let's say, there's a few siblings, and now one of the siblings, if the new owner says, oh, now I'm the new owner of this plot, I don't want you to bury the person here, or I'm the new owner of the pathway, I don't let you get through this pathway to get to the burial plot, and then they're going to have to bury that brother somewhere else. So then people will say there must have been something wrong with that brother. Maybe he was illegitimate, some kind of problem, and it will create a negative reputation about that family, which isn't true. And so therefore, the new owner is forced to allow the family members to come and bury their dead there and do the eulogy and do the ma'amad and everything that they would normally do. They may very well have to pay afterwards for that right. It's not that it will be for free, but he can't refuse them outright. Tenor Rabbanan, en pochatin mishiva ma'amadot umoshabot lemet. Keneged, habel habalim amar kohelet. Habel habalim hakol habel. Another Braita says that you have to do at least 7 times standing and sitting for the deceased. Why 7 times? Because of the pasuk that says in Kohelet, vanity of vanities, says Kohelet, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Now it actually only says it 5 times, but 2 of them are in plural. So we count the plural as double. So that's 1. Hevel Havalim is 2, that's 3, and then Hevel Havalim is another 3, and Hevel at the end is the 7th one. And the idea is that this would be part of the message, besides the eulogies in which you actually talk about the deceased and bring people to tears and talk about sad things and give them rebuke and so on. That would be the typical eulogy, but during the standing and sitting sessions, usually the comforters would say, everything is vanity, everything in the world is fragile and ends up dying. And while that's a depressing message, but in a way, it can be comforting for someone that experienced a loss to say, don't get attached to anything. All of life is fleeting, and this is the way of the world. And so Kohelet can be a comforting message that this is the way of life, nothing new under the sun, everything has its time, has a cycle, and so on. And so because this pasuk says 7 times, so therefore you should do the standing and sitting and giving these types of messages also 7 times. Amar le Rav Acha bered Rava le Rav Ashe, Hechi abdi, Amar le kedetanya. So Rav Acha, the son of Rava, told Rav Ashe, how exactly do you do this ma'amadot and moshavot? He says, I'll tell you. Based on this baraita. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Bihuda, Parishona lo hayu pochatin mishiva ma'abadot umoshavot lemet. So first of all, Rabbi Yehuda talked about in Judea, they used to not do less than 7 times that they would stand stand and sit. And how did they do this? Kigon, imdu yikarim amodu, shebu yikarim shebu. So they would walk a little, and then the comforters would say, stand, friends, stand. First they were sitting. So if they were sitting, they would say, stand, friends, stand. And then they would walk a little bit, and then they would say, sit, our precious ones, dear ones, sit. So they would keep doing this, and then while they were sitting, they would say some words, and then they would stand again, walk a little bit, and sit once again. Amru lo, im ken, af b'Shabbat mutar la'asot ken. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda said, but his colleague said, if that's all you're doing, then you should even be able to do the ma'amad ceremony on Shabbat. You see, on Shabbat, you're not allowed to have public mourning customs and eulogies. That's not appropriate for Shabbat. But since here they're not actually giving proper eulogies, they're not talking about the deceased or giving words of rebuke or making people cry. Back then they would hire professional wailers to make everybody cry, and so that would not be appropriate for Shabbat. But here, if you're just standing and sitting and walking and talking about Kohelet themes, so there's nothing wrong with that on Shabbat. So that was their retort to Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're going to see a story that will relate to that source. Ahate de Rami bar Papa hava nesiba le Rav Avya. The sister of Rami bar Papa was married to Rav Avya, and she died, Shechiba. Abad la ma'amad umoshav. So her husband, Rav Avya, did this standing and sitting ceremony for his wife. He loved her, and he and the family members that were there appreciated, he thought would appreciate doing this and find comfort in it. So he did this. He arranged it. Amar Rav Yosef, ta'a betarte. Rav Yosef, however, criticized Rav Avya for doing it and the way he did it in two things, two matters of criticism. Ta'a shenosin ela bikrovim v'hu abad afilu birchokim. Number one, when you do the ma'amad moshav, it should only be for immediate relatives, those who are sitting or mourning. But he did it even for distant relatives. I guess there were whatever second cousins and other people that were very sad about her dying, and he also told them that they should sit and they should stand up, but that's not appropriate. It should only be for immediate relatives. And second, it should only be done on the day of burial. But he didn't do it on the day of burial. He did it the next day, on the second day of mourning. He did the ma'amad and moshav, and this was improper for him to do in this way. That's not standard procedure. And then now they pile up against Rav Avya. Abaye Amar beha nameta'a she'enosin ela bebet hakebarot hu asa habayir. Abaye says, I have another criticism. Rav Avya did it. It's supposed to only be done at the cemetery, but he did it in the town. You're supposed to do it right at the cemetery. There you offer words, and then you do the standing and sitting. But he did it back in the town on the next day. Rava Amar beha nameta'a she'enosin ela b'makom shenahu nahagu hatam lanehu. Rava says, I have yet another criticism. You should only do the ma'amad and moshav in a place where that is the custom to do it, where everybody usually does it. But there, it was not the custom to do so. And so he did it in a place where it's not the usual custom. And that is also not proper. I guess he felt like, this is a nice custom and the family would appreciate it, but you shouldn't just do it in a place where most people don't do it. Me'etibe, hamru lo, im ken af b'shabbat mutar la'asot ken. V'yamat b'bet hakebarot u'b'yom rishon b'bet hakebarot b'shabbat mi ba'eh. Now we challenge those very criticisms that Rav Yosef and that Abaye made, because look at the Braita. The Braita is more authoritative. It's from the Tanaim. And in the Braita it says that the rabbis told Rabbi Yehuda, wait, if you're only saying a Pisukim from Kohelet and things like that, and you're not giving actual eulogies, then it should be permitted to do the Ma'amad and Moshav even on Shabbat. That's the Braita. Now here's the argument. If you say that it has to be done in the cemetery on the day of burial, wait, what are they doing in the cemetery on Shabbat? We don't bury people on Shabbat, and so therefore their retort wouldn't make any sense. So it's evident from this Braita above that they said, well, if the contents is only talking about Hebel Havalim and it's not eulogies, then you should be able to do it on Shabbat. But we don't usually do it on Shabbat, and therefore they disagreed with the procedure that Rabbi Yehuda said. Fine. But they're disagreeing based on an argument that otherwise you could have done it on Shabbat. That's assuming that, except for the contents, you could do it on Shabbat. But how could you do it on Shabbat if, according to you, Rav Yosef and Abaye, it has to be done on the day of burial, and it has to be done in the cemetery. But you can't bury someone on Shabbat anyway, so there's no way you would be able to do the Ma'amad and Moshav on Shabbat if it was at the cemetery on the day of burial. So you see, that doesn't make your arguments against Rav Avya don't make any sense, and therefore we should support Rav Avya. But we have an answer. We're talking about a case where the city is right next to the cemetery. And so, first of all, you can travel there on Shabbat because it's right next door. It's adjacent. So there's no problem of traveling there. And it's where they brought the deceased for burial right before Shabbat. So that they buried the person before Shabbat started. A couple of minutes before sunset, it was already buried. So now they're already there, and now they're going to be going back to the city, which is adjacent. So they're not doing anything prohibited on Shabbat. The burial was already done. And so now the question is, in a case like that, could you do the Ma'amad and Moshav? And that's where the rabbis told Rabbi Yehuda, listen, if you're not saying any eulogies, then you should be allowed to do that on Shabbat. And so you see, this is consistent with Rav Yosef and Abaye, who say that you're only allowed to do the Ma'amad and Moshav at the cemetery on the day of the burial. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.